So welcome to another wargame review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander, and today we're taking a look at Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit 1 from Multi-Man Publishing. I think a lot of people are like, oh, finally! Oh, this game. Okay. First off, I'm here on my own because I played this with a friend of ours, Ed, who lives nearby, and he has played a lot of ASL Starter Kit, and I think a lot of ASL as well, and he taught me the game. And I'm very glad that that was the experience that I had, because I think I definitely would have done it wrong digging the rules out myself, because the rules are very dense. They're not very long, but they're very dense. And it's easy, so easy to forget things or to miss things in this game, because there is a lot of steps and there's a lot of procedure to it. I say that as a big thanks to Ed for coming over and teaching me this. We played it over the course of about, oh gosh, was it 3 or 4 hours? He'd come over for an hour at lunch break. We'd play for about an hour, do a turn or two, and then I would take a picture of it and we'd set it up again the next week and do the same thing, back and forth. We did it over the course of about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. And we played the first scenario in this, and I think that's like the most played scenario of any war game ever, pretty much, it feels like. And it was very interesting to learn this system. And people ask all the time, when are you going to get to ASL? When are you going to get to the ASL starter kits? And I have this, and I have like 2, 3, and 4, and I've got Decision Elst, and I've got a couple packs, and I have like a bunch of ASL boxes as well. And so we've had them for ages, just never got around to like pulling the trigger and sitting down to learn it. I have taken these rule books out and I have started to read them on a number of occasions, and it just never happened. So once again, thanks to Ed for like teaching the game, because if he hadn't, I don't think it was ever going to happen. I had tried a number of times and it just wasn't going to happen. So, Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit 1. Not to be mistaken with Advanced Squad Leader. Advanced Squad Leader is its own game with massive boxes, with whole orders of battles of armies, that has like the 300-page rules binder. That's not what this is. This is the Squad Leader, Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kits. And there's 4 or 5 of them in the series. Each of them has a bunch of missions in it. It's almost its own separate game system. Even though they have very similar systems, you can do just the starter kits and get a bunch of those, and you're going to have a great time. If that's what you're into, obviously. So this is if you don't know, this is a 2-player hex encounter tactical World War II game. One of you plays like the Germans or the Russians, and the other side plays the US or the British or whatever else boxes that you've got. In this one we played Americans and Germans. And all of that stuff does matter, because your force compositions are all different and all, from what I can tell, like historically accurate. So the composition of what a platoon looks like with the different squads and heavy weapons and things like that. And you know, the ranks of the different leaders and their qualities as a result. All of that stuff is factored into the counters of this game. I think I played as the Americans in this one. I basically had to run in and defend a bunch of buildings that the Germans were trying to go and retake, basically. And what I enjoy, here's the thing, I enjoyed what we did. I enjoyed playing with Ed, and I'm really grateful that he taught us this game. But I would not feel confident teaching this to Grant, because it's still very deep and lots of layers. And again, if you mess up a layer, it really has knock-on consequences, because, you know, in this particular fire phase, I should have done this, which would have done that to you, so you couldn't have done this, which you then did something to me which couldn't have happened. And so if you make mistakes, walking those back can be quite difficult if you've gone kind of down the chain of the sequence of play. But that's what happens when you have a game that is very detailed. And I think that's what I would say about this game. And this isn't even regular ASL. This is still a very detailed game. I don't think anyone would accuse it of being a realistic kind of game, but some of the detail translates into things that would happen. So that's one of, to me, the defining points of this game is you can move and you can rally, all those things that you would normally do in these tactical games. You know, making little fire teams and shooting and stuff like that. That's all fairly normal. But where I think this, even the Starter get their reputation from is the overlapping and very large amount of kind of fire and defensive fire steps. So the sequence of play is that we have our little rally phase, and then we have our prep fire phase, and then we have our movement phase, and then we have defensive first fire, then we have our defensive fire phase, then we have advancing fire phase, then we have a rout phase, and then an advance phase, and then a close combat phase. And then in all of that you have your like residual fire on the table as a result of a lot of those different types of fires. So first off, the terminology is something you just got to get used to. Everything is some kind of fire or some kind of phase, and I swear it is so easy to like say the wrong thing and then to get yourself kind of like wound up and say the wrong thing. Of like, oh, I thought we were doing this particular phase. And like, no, it's this phase, and it works slightly differently from this fire phase. So just take your time, get it straight. There are some extremely good play aids on Board Game Geek where, because the sequence of play on the play aid that comes in this is, I don't want to say pitiful, but it's not great. There's some really good expanded sequences of play out there that have a bit more detail and kind of walk you through, hey, remember this, this, and this is what you should do. This is when you remove these particular types of admin counters. Other ones are removed in this other phase. So there's some really good aids out there to help you get into this. But just don't, it's very daunting, but don't let it kind of scare you away. Because once you've done it a few times, you get into the rhythm of the game where you're like, cool, there's this like prep fire where like this is all you're going to do. You're going to sit there and do your prep fire. You're just going to shoot at maximum combat strengths, and that's what you're doing. Pretty much nothing else. And then there's going to be movement and defensive fire when you do move, and then you go through these other fire phases of like, okay, well, and then how many times you can shoot within each of those phases. Oh man. So just know that like, yes, lots of detail, but like, if you can find someone to teach you this, is much easier to pick up, is what I would say. Not saying that you couldn't just read the rules and pick it up, but it was much simpler to have someone who knew it walk me through it. So if you can find someone, you should do it. But I kind of said it earlier, I enjoyed what we were doing, but also I would say that this game system isn't for me. There's a lot of tactical systems out there. We have played a lot of them. I can see why people love this game, without a doubt. But for me, it just didn't have that extra spark of something that like really excited me. And that's fair to say. There's a number of tactical games out there that kind of fit that bill, but I'm objective enough to say, well, like, yeah, of course people love this. The level of detail in it, and you get all of the heavy weapons, and even the vehicles and stuff that you can do. People would love that level of detail, and the crunch that surrounds that. Well, if I've got a little satchel charge, what does that do? Well, 10 attack strength or whatever it is. Oh, someone's got a flamethrower. How does that function? Well, I walk up to a building and just torch the place and everyone runs out. Like, it gets down into the weeds of that and the functionality of that. And so then you have to treat those assets differently, because if you just run them up, they're going to be prime targets and they're going to get picked off. And so your forces act, or you have to make your forces act differently with whatever weapons loadouts that you have, or the state of, disarray or damage that your guys have taken. If you've got leaders and guys who are like forced to rout and retreat, you route and retreat them to a building or something with cover, and they're going to rally. And it's little details like that that I really did like, because every other game you just kind of like sit there and like rally in place. But I don't feel like that's what happens. Sometimes that can happen. But a lot of times, if you're taking heavy fire, a couple of guys get wounded, and you're like, we're combat ineffective, you go somewhere safer, relatively speaking, to regroup and reassess, rally yourselves, and then get back out there. And so little bits and pieces like that I thought were really, really good, and that I did really like. But overall, it was a lot of counting and a lot of work, and I just think there's other systems out there that I prefer. Now, all that being said, I'm going to show you, at least somewhat, how this works and what a scenario might look like, and then I'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. Okay, so here's a look at the map, and once again, I'm not going to teach you the whole rules of this, because even though it's a 12-page rulebook, it's still very dense. There's a lot of structure and layers to it, and I would also hate to misteach you if I make any mistakes here. But effectively, very much like a tactical war game, here's the little hex map. The set comes with 3, I think, in a geomorphic, so you can line them all up, or the roads line up, or different terrain features like the forests. So, you get a number of scenarios in it, and that's how the board is set up. This is the first one. It's just this portion. This map's actually a little bit bigger, but these hexes are out of play, so I just put the play aid over it. The play aid also, it's kind of off camera here, has a turn track on it, and it has your reinforcement schedule on there as well. And the nice thing is that the reinforcement schedule is pictorial, so it actually shows you here. Let me get one from one of the other scenarios so that you can see that. I actually really appreciated this as a beginner, setting this up. It's not only like, oh, you get X amount of units, it pictorially shows you which ones, so that when you're rifling through it the first few times, to me, that's very easy to reference. It'll have any special rules on it, little balancing changes you can make, and the victory conditions as well. And these are dual-sided, right? So there's a number of scenarios in this. So how does the game work? You're going to have 2 turns, or 2 kind of impulses, or halves of the turn per turn. So in this particular one, the Germans take their turn, then the Americans take their turn. That's the end of round 1. This game was 5 full rounds long. What are you going to do? Well, there is an extremely small sequence of play on here. You're going to have a rally phase, where you try to rally guys who are broken. You're going to do prep fire, so you're going to shoot. And those guys who do prep fire then can't move. So in a lot of tactical games, it's you can either move and then shoot worse, or if you shoot, you then can't move, but you shoot at full, right? That attacking, you're going to think principally like that. So I'm trying to move this turn, maybe take a couple pot shots at half strength, but then next turn, those guys are going to be stationary, they'll have got into firing positions, they're going to fire at full effect next turn, but then they won't be able to move, right? All of those very familiar tactical principles are in this. It's just broken down into these stages. So you have your prep fire, you're going to shoot with guys, and you're going to add up their little combat factors, and you're going to roll 2d6 on the appropriate CRT column, and then you're going to get a result of that. This is a game where you always pretty much want to roll low. If you roll low, you're going to inflict maximum damage, maximum casualties. So that's kind of prep fire. Let me kind of show you a couple of units here, and we can see what that looks like. So here we have a couple of elite US Paras, or airborne troops as they like to call them. So this is a multi-man counter. It has lots of people on it, right? More than one. These are full squads. They have a 7 underlined attack strength. That means they have, I think that's their assault. Their assault. They're capable of assault fire. They have a movement factor and they have a morale factor. No, we don't use the middle number in this game. I think we don't use the middle number. I can't remember. And but the far right number is their morale value. You got to roll that number. You got to roll under that number when you make morale checks. I think they said the middle number we never used, and it looks like it would be a movement factor, but it's not, because movement in ASL is it's generically dealt with. So there's kind of movement points and movement factors through terrain. That's what you would expect. However, how much you can move depends on what kind of units you are and if you've got leaders. So if it's just a regular unit, they're going to get, there's some carrying capacities or portage points. But generally speaking, a regular infantry squad can move 4 spaces. What they can do is that they can CX, which stands for something, but I don't remember what it is. They can move further. So if you get CX, you can move an extra 2 spaces, so you can move 6 spaces. And CXing is important because you might want to move further across the map to get yourself into combat, depending on where you've come in for reinforcements, or you might want to get out of the way. But CXing means that in close combat you are worse and the enemy is better. And also, it means that infantry firing at you, it's -1. So it's easier for them to hit you because you're kind of running full out in the open. So CX, it's one of those risk-reward things. Do I CX? Do I not? So that's just alone. Now, if you have a leader, if it's just a guy and they've got a leader stacked with them, let's get this little leader, Mr. Sergeant O'Brien, or a good Irish name there. If it's just infantry with a leader, well, they can already go 6. But if it's with a leader and they CX, they can go 8 if they all CX. So if you've got a leader and some infantry, you can run them pretty far out in the open if you choose to kind of go that way. Think about, it's not like strategic move, but it's putting that extra effort into movement, and you're going to sacrifice some defensive capabilities to do that. So that's kind of what the combat units look like. In the starter kits, you've got the fire factors, the combat factors, and you've got the morale factors. It's effectively what you're using because, like we said, the movement is handled intrinsically. That's the correct term for it. So let's do a little combat here real quick just so that we can see. We're going to stick these Americans in this building, and we're going to have these poor sap Germans standing out in the road. If they're static, let's say we'll just shoot them, right? This is our prep fire phase. These guys are sat out in the road, just twiddling their thumbs. We're going to do a prep fire. So we're going to mark ourselves with a little prep fire marker once we've done that, right? That indicates to us that we can't move. So to do prep fire, you just add up your combat factors and you're going to roll the dice. So we've got 7 and 7 is 14. And if you look on this table, there is not a 14 chart. So you go down you round down to the nearest table. So we're going to roll on the 12 chart. And we're within range. You can shoot at like extra range and stuff, but we're not. We're at good range. But our little leader here, he's 8 minus 1. So 8 is his morale, but the -1, that's his leadership modifier. So we're going to roll 2d6, and we're going to do it at a -1 because of the leader. And then let's have a little look here. We've got open ground, terrain effects modifier, none. So we're just going to shoot like that. So we're going to roll 2d6. And again, you're trying to roll low. So I'd roll pretty badly. So we've got 9 minus 1 is an 8. And we rolled on the 12 table to an 8, and an 8 gives us a 1 MC check. And a lot of these, this is all variations of MCs, which are morale checks. And then kind of up here, this is a lot of KIAs. Things get real ugly. So we shot, dagger, dagger, dagger. Now these guys have to make what's called a 1 morale check. And that's a morale check with a negative, or with a +1 modifier. That's bad. So this first guy, you have to roll less than an 8 to be fine. So we roll 5, 6, 7, +1 is 8, because we had that 1 from the modifier. If you equal your morale value, you become pinned. If we rolled under, we'd have been fine. And then this guy over here, he's going to roll. We rolled a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's less than 8. He's fine. So it looks like this. So the pinned guy, he can't move, he can't advance, and he only has half firepower whilst he's pinned. But the other guy's totally fine. If we had messed that up, if we'd rolled really poorly, then he would be broken. You flip him over to his little broken side. He only has a morale value, and they're all lying down on the counter, right? So, like, not good. Though you don't want to be broken. If you break, the first time you break, you get a DM marker, and DM also stands for something. Is it a disruption modifier, I think? Basically, your first rally check that you make is made at +4, and remember you're trying to roll under an 8. So, oh, yes! That's perfect. But, so the first morale check you make, it is very rare that you pass your first one, but then that goes away, and then you're much more likely to pass your second one. That's kind of how the morale works in this. Is if you get broken, you're going to get DM'd. It's likely you're going to be out for minimum 1 round, if you think about it that way. But that's prep fire, right? It's combat factors, find the chart, roll the dice, try to roll low, right? And then you're going to inflict morale checks or KIAs. You start doing KIAs, you start killing people. So but that's prep fire. You sit there, shoot them, he's got prep fire, he's done. Great. Then we've got movement phase. This is where you're going to move all your units. And remember, it's that intrinsic movement value. And it's very simple, right? 1 to move into open, 1 to move into open, 1 to move into open. You know, a couple to move into stone building, a couple to move into forests, things like that. Moving very, very much what you would expect it to be. Now, what's important is that you're going to take defensive fire when you move. So let's say I move out into the open. I'm going to take fire from any good order units that choose to. So like all other tactical games, I move to this hex, do you want to fire, yes or no? I move to this hex, do you want to fire, yes or no? And you know, you kind of got to be pretty regimented about it to offer people chances. Now, one of the really important parts is that if you ever move adjacent to a unit, firepower is doubled. So it's very risky trying to get into people to do assaults and things like that, or to do melee combat, because when you move adjacent to them, this guy's going to open fire. He's a 5 normally, he's going to be a 10. So all of a sudden, things get real nasty. Now, if you've got a couple guys here that are at 10 and you move adjacent to them, they're shooting at a 20. And the 20 table, let me tell you, is pretty gross. You don't want to get involved in some of that stuff. And so what that does is it encourages you to have at least some element of squad tactics. So I've got a unit here, and I got a unit in this building here, but I need to assault this building. Well, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to lay down fire with these guys to try and break them so that then I move these guys in. And they can do it without taking defensive fire, right? Think about it. Try to do suppressive fire, put their heads down, or like kill some guys and break them, cause some confusion, then we can rush in there and take them out. And I know every tactical game does that, but this one encourages that a bit more by having those extremely strong adjacency modifiers. Like, you almost can't just run in normally and take an attack. Every other game, you would just take an attack, and you're like, screw it, it's a 5, who cares, I bet I can do it. In this one, he's now a 10, and you're like, that, instead of rolling on this, because a 5 goes down to a 4 table, which is, you know, you're rolling on an 8 table, the odds on you're not going to make it. And so it really, really encourages that element of things. So you're going to do your moves, you're going to take some defensive fire, and then once you're done moving, anyone who didn't kind of take opportunity fire like that are going to have regular defensive fire. So, you know, you finish moving everyone, there's a couple guys left, okay, cool, he'll take a couple pot shots here, take a couple pot shots there. That's all defensive stuff. And so you are always engaged in this. There's no downtime in this game for either side, which is nice. Now, having moved all of my little active guys, now I do advancing fire. And advancing fire is, if I have moved, then I can shoot. However, like we discussed earlier, you shoot at half strength. So half of this is going to be 10, so it's a 10, so half, we're going to get to a 5. And so I can shoot, I can move and shoot, but the shooting is on the 5 strength, which goes onto a 4 table. It's not nearly as good as the prep fire, which was kind of shooting up and around here, right? So then I'm going to do that. After having done my advancing fire, then we're going to rout guys. And whenever you have broken units that are like out in the open, or if they're adjacent to enemy units, they have to rout, they have to try to get away. And if you can't get away because you're surrounded, like, you have to be able to move further away from any known enemy units. If you can't rout away, you get eliminated. It's very, very punitive, but like, to me, that's also a good reward for having good positioning and that kind of a thing. So after you do all your routing, then you have your advance phase. So let's say we'd shot this guy and we'd moved up and we'd done some advancing fire, but we still hadn't finished him off. He has to rout away, and then advance phase is anyone who hasn't, you know, isn't totally used up with like prep fire. He can advance, you can move 1 space, and there's no defensive fire for that. Advancing is also the only way that you can move into melee. So let's say this guy was in good order. I've run out into the open and he's shot me and I passed my morale checks. I advance 1 space into melee, and then guess what? The close combat phase is the last thing of the turn. We're going to do a close combat. So let's do a little close combat real quick, because that's quite different. Close combats were, if you've watched much of the Player's Aid, close combat is always something that we find very interesting, because it's always very lethal, it's very swingy, and it's typically resolved differently, so it just gives you kind of a change of pace in the game as well. So in this one, you're going to roll, to see if there's an ambush. So I'm going to roll a die, and I rolled a 5, and the opponent rolled a 2, and that's good. So what we're looking for is the difference there. So if the DR is greater DR by at least 3, so this is 3 bigger than this, then there is an ambush, and that's nice because ambush is going to give us a +1 on our dice. So, and I think you inflict your losses first. I think it's possible to eliminate someone before they can shoot back. But if you don't, basically you're going to do strength here. So we've got 2 to 1. So the Americans are going to roll 2 to 1 on 2d6, and they need they need a 7, and you kill the enemy outright. They're all dead. They're on 1 to 2, so they're going to roll on this little 1 to 2 table. On 2d6, they need a 4. No. So if that was the case, we both kind of swing and miss. We're both locked in melee, and like, none of them can do anything else other than continue to fight the melee. And if you shoot in there, you attack everyone in that stack, and you're going to kill your own guys. So be very judicious about that. But again, if you have a leader in there who's going to give you a little -2, you're going to get an ambush bonus of -1. Then all of a sudden you roll your little 2d6, 5, 6. Well, we only needed a 7, but technically we rolled a 3 because we have -3, right? The bonuses add up, and you straight up just eliminate guys off the board. Now, it is possible that you cock up your roll, and you're rolling something like a 12, and you might miss, even if you've got like 4 to 1 odds. You can miss, And a guy who has 1 to 4 odds, he can roll his little 3, and he's... And it almost happened. Like, you can kill, like, multiple multi-man squads and leaders outright with your little, 3-man counter. You can do it. Like, it's just a point of high drama and a great piece of narrative, and those people are going to go home and get awards if they survive, right? Like, that's... sometimes it can be very swingy if you have very good luck versus very bad luck, but yeah, that's Melee. That's what I would expect from something in Melee. It's very lethal, it's very tough, you have to do it judiciously, or, as a last gasp kind of Hail Mary style situation. But generally speaking, that's the kind of game that this is. It's moving around, trying to utilize terrain. Oh, one of the other cool things that I had learned about this, which was interesting, and I don't know if I've ever seen it quite like this before, is line of sight, which normally is an extremely boring part of most rulebooks, but in this one was neat. So what happens is let's say I got a guy, I don't know, over here, and he's trying to shoot this guy who's, let's say he's over here, right? We're trying to make something like this shot. Most of the time, you can eyeball it, and it's center dot to center dot, and you're like, cool, I can make that shot. But the rule in the game is you have to declare your shot before you're allowed to physically measure it to check. So I have to say, yeah, okay, cool, I'm going to take that pot shot. And then, after you've declared it, you then get out your little measuring tape and you measure it. And if it clips any part of like a building, any kind of blocking terrain, then the attack is null and void. He can't do a different attack. He like just shot the building, basically. So it was a neat thing of like the risk reward of trying to eyeball an attack, and then you'd measure it and be like, I can't make it. And it's like, you're shooting and you're just not making those shots. It was a neat little aspect of it because some of the corners and the way the buildings are drawn is very irregular. And so it can be hard to predict, like, this guy shooting into this hex, he clips this little part of building here. But if I'm shooting into this hex, this is a bit less clear of, is it going to clip something like that? And in some of these very congested areas and shooting at distance, that's a significant consideration. And so it's neat to kind of, you declare it and then you measure it, you're like, I can't do it. Oh, I can like sneak a shot in here, and you're like, yeah, good for you. But loosely, that's how this works and the kind of game that it is, right? You take all your turn, but during that, and I will tell you, there is a lot of defensive fires and opportunity fires, and then it goes to my turn, and I'm the aggressor and the attacker, and then the opponent has their defensive fires, trying to rally guys back and forth. But that's kind of the core of the game. Even though it's a 12-page rulebook, it's still pretty dense. I know that was a long kind of explanation, but what we'll do is wrap up with a few final thoughts. So that was a look at the board, and again, a little bit of how it works. The rulebook's not even that big, but there's so much packed into it that it's kind of hard to show everything. But again, I had a really enjoyable time with Ed playing this, and it was cool to learn a system that's so famous and so beloved. But I'm also grown up enough to say that it's not for me, and I will probably keep this, but I might sell the other ones in my collection because I know I'm just never going to get to them. And there's nothing wrong with that. Doesn't mean it's a bad system. Doesn't mean that like, oh, everyone's unsubscribing now. It's pretty funny. And I don't dislike, it doesn't make my opinion change of people who love this system. I can absolutely appreciate why people would. But I think I prefer other games at this scale, and generally speaking, I think I prefer games at different scales. And so all of my ASL stuff takes up a lot of shelf space, and knowing now, having kind of dipped my toe even a little bit, I know I'm never going to play all of that. It's never going to be something that I actually get to, just as a function of what we do here at the Player's Aid and how much space I've got on my shelves. So I think I'm going to part ways with most of it. I'm going to keep some of it. I'll keep this box for sure, because if I do revisit it, it'll probably be this. I might keep Decision Else because it's got some British in it and it has some armor and stuff. So one day, if I want to do that, I can. But for me personally, it just didn't. It didn't awaken that joy that I get from other systems. And this system isn't unique in not doing that for me. We've played a bunch of tactical systems, and some of them are just fine. They're just okay, or like, this is good, but not for me. And this falls into that category for me. And that's good for my wallet, that's for sure. I know I don't need to... As much as, like, whenever MMP releases those big boxes that have cool names and artwork on them, and it has, like, it's a whole army, it's all of the Finns, or it's all of the Japanese. Those boxes are really cool. And I'm like, oh, man, maybe I'll one day do that. The reality is I know at this point now that I will not. And so I'm probably going to part ways with most of my ASL stuff. But I will keep a couple bits and pieces around because, you know, if I ever do get that itch again, having a box like this gives me 6 or 7 scenarios that I can wet my whistle with. And if I'm playing through all of that and want more, you know, I can always dive back in. But at this point, the shelf space and the time is... I just know I'm not going to be able to invest that in ASL at this point. ASL is famously a lifestyle game, and the ASL starter kits are like a smaller version of that. But if you have all the boxes, that could be your tactical system. You can play those, just those, as a lifestyle game as well. Or you can go from this and branch out into full ASL, which changes some of the rules, but mostly just adds a lot of extras. And you get that big old rule book with every conceivable rule and weapon in it, if that's the way that you want to go. So, Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit 1, I enjoyed what we did. I just find myself lacking the motivation and drive to do more with it. And it's so... I'm very glad it was taught to me, and I will never be able to express how grateful that I am for that, because I felt like, again, if I'd done it myself, I probably wouldn't have been able to do this game any justice with my experience with it. But having an experienced player who's like, this is how it works, and this is what we do, and this is why, getting some of those extra layers and making sure that we remembered all of the different steps in the sequence of play and various moving parts of the rules, I'm very grateful for that, because I feel like I was able to get a really good experience out of it. But I have a million tactical systems, and some of those I'm also probably need to move on, because Grant has a copy, or we just never get back to some of them. But I think I would recommend that you check this out, because everyone's going to say, oh, it's this, you know, very famous, amazing war game. Everyone should check it out. If you're going to check it out, this is definitely where you should start. Because I think this has a lot of pros to it from that standpoint. Either you don't like it, in which case, it was a small little box, you can always sell it on, it's not the end of the world. Or, you do like it, but you don't want to advance into ASL, because you're happy with this, in which case, you've got a good game, you've got a good package, you've got 7 or 8 scenarios in it, excuse me. And then there's the other starter kits that you can get. So like, you have this mini kind of series or system that you can just stick with. Or, you really like it and you absolutely love it, and you want to progress on, so you've got this, you've learned the core rules, and then it's not as daunting taking that extra step into full-blown ASL with the big boxes and the big rulebook. So, they know that. That's why they made these. And so, there is great merit to this box and to this system, And if you're going to dip your toe into ASL in any format, you should start here. I would definitely recommend that. If you can find an ASL player near you who can help you to teach you, I would also recommend tapping their knowledge. Because if there's one thing I've learned about wargamers over the years, boy, do they love to tell you about their favorite game. And so once again, Ed, so grateful for you for coming over and teaching me this game. We had kind of, in my brain I thought, oh, I'll do like one from each box so I can pick up like the heavy weapons and the tanks and the other stuff, and it just, but my kind of my drive to do that has waned, and there's nothing wrong with that. There might come a time in my life where I totally revisit this and pick it up and I might love it again, but I just don't feel that excitement and drive to kind of dive on in further into this. So once again, I'm keeping this box, but I might move on the other ones in the series that I do have. But anyway, I have sat here and rambled for a while, but hopefully this was kind of helpful, maybe. A lot of people have been asking for ASL stuff, and they might be disappointed because I wasn't like, it's the best game ever. But I can understand why people do think that. Absolutely. I can appreciate what this system does and what it tries to be. I think it succeeds at being what it tries to be. But it doesn't have to be for everyone. It's not for me, and that's okay. I'm still going to keep this box so that if I decide to revisit, I can. But thank you very much for sitting around with me. I know it was a bit rambling, a bit all over the place, but Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit 1 from Multiman Publishing. Please check this out if this is something that you're interested in. Even if you're like, oh, maybe one day, this is the box to get. You should get this box to check this out, because you might be on the cusp of finding what you think is the greatest system of all time, and it might change your wargaming life. I know it has done that for a lot of people over the course of the years of its existence. So, ASL SK1, check it out if you're interested, but appreciate you very much for tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersaid.com.